Right, thanks. Can I share the screen? Yeah. Can everyone see the screen?
Yep, it's fine, Stead.
Great. Who the giants are and how we should behave towards them are two of the most important questions one must consider if one wishes to take the Norse or Eddic revelation seriously. That's to say, the corpus of myth attested in the collection of poems called the Poetic Edda, and in the account of the stories and poetic forms underlying this literary tradition called the Prose Edda, both of which are written down in the 13th century. In Iceland, some 250 years since the country had adopted Christianity, and there they are in a handy 4-volume set. Small and late as the Eddas are, they provide unique illumination upon what would otherwise be opaque in the traces that remain of Germanic pre-Christian religion in Anglo-Saxon as well as in Scandinavian and continental culture. And furthermore, in conjunction with cognate mythic materials such as the classical and the Hindu, they contribute to an understanding of the root of that great tree of Indo-European culture, of which they represent but one of the branches. And the more that is understood about the tree as a whole, the more one understands the individual branches. There seem to be just 3 references to Nephilim in the Bible. Even if one adds the references to Anakim and other possibly preternaturally large beings, it's still a very small fraction of less than 1% of the whole text. One could remove those references and reading the Bible for the first time, one would not notice their absence. Were the same excision made to the Eddas, such a removal, the removal of the giants, would take away the principal protagonists in opposition to which the gods are defined as gods, and most of the myths would be rendered incoherent. The anti-gods is how some commentators like to describe the giants to make this point, and their opposition is theologically central to understanding this ethical system, in distinction to that wherein the Nephilim are mentioned. If a god is something one regards as having intrinsic value to a degree worthy of worship, then within such a system, a god is something one should be loyal to and support over the thing to which it is opposed, which, however, might not in itself be otherwise evil. The fruit or flower over what one regards as a weed, the team one is a member of over the team one is playing against. In addition to the contending camp of gods and giants, there's also an impersonal principle which might be called law, which governs both what happens in nature and what is appropriate in behavior. And this applies equally to all forces of creation and corresponds to the concept of dharma in the Hindu dispensation. If I might attempt to make a generalization, in distinction to the Abrahamic understanding, deity emerges within creation rather than existing outside and exerting an influence upon it. And nature itself has its own laws and authority rather than being the projected will of an external power. And the nature of nature is that the gods contend with the giants, and whether what happens is good or ill for us is which of these higher or lower powers prevails. That's at least one view to take, which seems implicit in the mythology. And yes, here centrally there's an image of the god Thor, and the other 2 pictures framing him to represent how divinity kind of just emerges, creates itself. And here is a picture of him fighting the giants, this sense of the duality that's present in creation. The size of the giants. The assumption that the so-called giants are bigger than those whom they are being measured against is a natural one to make, but their size is not often referred to in the poems and in the prose, and similarly with the category of beings referred to as dwarves, who are rarely spoken of as small. Size is in both cases not dwelt on because it's not a significant factor in their identity. And when it's referred to, one may argue that size is more of a symbol for other qualities, strength, coarseness, stupidity, a connection with the primal elements, may all be symbolized by greater size. Conversely, skill in craft and manufacture, industriousness, living underground and in a certain secrecy may seem to befit those who are smaller than average and who may not have the physical advantages of the larger limbed. But whom are they being compared to when they are being called giants? Gods or men? In the Eddas, it's the gods that they engage, fight, and sometimes even marry with. Contact with men occurs later in folklore, but by their name, the giants, it seems to me one may infer that people consider them to be of comparable magnitude to the gods. Deities are in some sense unlimited in extent, yet at the same time comprehensible to us because they manifest themselves with discernible human attributes, and they appear in myth to inhabit a landscape that is in scale with these attributes. Thus, it seems reasonable to understand the giants in a similar vein, with an unspecified absolute size. The problem is the English word giant, which denotes nothing that is not large, whereas the Old Norse word for one of these beings, Jotun, denotes an individual of a particular genus, like the word troll, which may indeed indicate something large, but it need not. Giant is perhaps more a term of taxonomy than direct description. There is, however, reason why a genus is not inappropriately called giant, and that's because they derive from a genuinely cosmic giant, and they give birth to genuinely cosmic monsters, which I shall come to later. Why the word Jotun has historically been translated into English as giant is because the primal beings in Greek tradition that are in opposition to the Olympian gods appear under the name giantes. This has been taken to mean in etymology earthborn, but later it came to connotate largeness of stature. In his Theogony, Hesiod describes how amongst the primeval deities, the Titans, Kronos castrated his father Uranus when he came to lie with his mother Gaia, and how the drops of blood fell to earth and impregnated Gaia, that's to say the earth, who then gave birth to this race. They went on to contest the throne of heaven with the Olympians, a battle which is known as the Giantomachy and often represented subject in Greek culture. Hesiod was writing at an early period at about the same time as the Homeric poems were attaining a final form. Later writers tended to conflate the giants with the Titans and also with other enemies of the Olympian gods, such as Typhon, the great serpent, which reminds one of the Norse Midgard serpent, of course, which is definitely of giant origin. The giantomachy of classical paganism had a succession of commentators from within the tradition while it was still living, which unfortunately the literary record does not supply for Norse paganism. Plato, for example, saw in the battle a conflict between a material and spiritual view of life. Virgil saw it as between chaos and order, barbarism and civilization. Many saw it as a hubristic usurping of what was the natural order of affairs on the part of the giants, for which they deserved reprobation. Contemporary commentators upon the contemporary practice of the Norse religion bring, as one might expect, a set of values to the material which is in as marked a contrast to those of the classical commentators as contemporary society is in contrast to theirs. Ymir and the origin of the world. Here's just a piece of Greek art with a representation of Typhon there. Early of ages, when nothing was, there was neither sand, nor sea, nor cold waves. The earth was not found, nor the sky above. Guningagap was there, but grass nowhere. Guningagap was the primal void between different sources of change, different extremes of weather, and ice began to build up from Niflheim in the north and move towards the warmth of Muspelheim in the south. And when the icy rime and the warm winds met, then there was a thawing and a dripping, and in the flowing drops there was a quickening out of that power which had sent the heat. And there came the likeness of a man, and he was called Ymir, but the frost giants called him Olgomir, and from him come the race of frost giants. And all the giants come from Ymir. This line of descent from the first state of the unpeopled cosmos leads to the genuinely gigantic Ymir, who is as big as the world, as should be made clear. In his sleep, he sweated and brought forth a male and a female from his left armpit, and from both his legs, he brought forth a son. Yeah, here we see Guningagap and the line with Ymir there leading to the frost giants. There's another line from the first state of the cosmos. This begins with the cow Orthomla, as one can see, who, like Ymir, emerges out of the melting ice. Her milk nourishes Ymir, and her licking of the ice gradually reveals the man Buri, who has a son called Bor. Next, these two lines meet. Bor marries Besla, who's the daughter of Bothorn, who is named as a giant, and so one might assume comes from the line of Ymir, as this diagram shows. Now the gods enter the narrative. Bor and Besla have three sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve, who thus seem to be half giant in ancestry. However, they are of a different nature, or will become so. The transition that makes the gods gods is not spoken of, however. Etymologically, one may understand the names of these three brothers to mean inspiration, will, sanctity. And furthermore, one may understand the brothers to be aspects of merely one deity rather than separate beings, since Vili and Ve are scarcely attested elsewhere. Next, the prose editor perfunctorily informs us that the sons of Bor killed the giant Ymir, and his dismemberment led to the creation of the world. From Ymir's flesh was the world created, from blood the sea, cliff from bone, tree from hair, and from skull sky. And from his eyelashes the gentle gods made Midgard for the sons of man. And from his brains were they all, those lowering clouds created. So, according to this view, the substratum of physical reality is of the same substance as the giants, and the gods represent the force that is striving to thrive in opposition to it. The Norse giants are different from the Nephilim in that they are the first and cruder beings from whom the deities have evolved, as one might express it. The giants within a caste system. Multiple threads spin themselves into the fabric of any cloth. One thread here is that of a social hierarchy, and the giants being cast as an uncouth lower order. But like most natural phenomena, the giants are various, and some are notably wise, such as Vafthrûdnir, whom goddess Frigg, Odin's wife, warns her husband to be wary of just before the two engage in a formal battle of wits. And some are beautiful, such as Skadi, whom Lord Freyr marries. She is known for skiing and winter sports. One may read the gods and the giants as two different tribes, or one may read them as two different castes within one, and wherein one sees the operation of what has recently been called Dutton's rule. That is, a male may marry a lower caste female, and a female may marry a higher caste male, but not the other way around. This rule seems to correlate with empirical data across a wide variety of circumstances. There are two families of the Norse gods, the Aesir and the Vanir, who at one time had several at war, but who made a truce, and the resulting pantheon may be interpreted as one in which it is the Aesir who have the higher status. There are about 15 marriages or male-to-female relationships found in the Eddas. They all seem to observe this rule, except the one that gave birth to Loki. In the diagram, the top row across represents females of high to low caste, that's to say Aesir, Vanir, and Giant, and the column down represents males. All the shaded areas are types of permitted union, and the blank areas are not permitted union, and one can see for Balti the father of Loki, and Laufey, his mother. At the fulcrum between the gods and the giants stands Loki, who is an anomalous figure, half god on his mother's side and half giant on his father's side. And uniquely, he's always referred to as the son of his mother, as Loki, Laufey's son, rather than as the son of his father, which is the normal practice. He does two things that antagonize the gods and empower the giants, and together precipitate the final conflagration and conflict to the death that is well known as the Ragnarok. The first is that he causes the death of the god Baldur, the god of light, of purity and innocence, as he's described in the prose Edda. And he does this seemingly out of envy and for no particular reason. The second is that he sires three monsters with the giantess Angrboda. These are the Midgard serpent, who encircles the whole world, with whom Thor has a long-standing enmity. Fenris, the enormous and fearsome wolf, whose son will swallow the sun, it is said, and Hel, the goddess of, or the wardress rather, of the dead. And all these will be players in the army of the giants who will fight the gods at the Ragnarok. Fenris indeed is said to swallow Lord Odin, the king of the gods. It's a matter of dispute, however, how much a response to Christianity Loki and the Ragnarok are, and how much they owe to more indigenous European revelations. Rökatru, loyalty to the dark or underworld powers. There is a part of the pagan community, the contemporary pagan community, that endorses a different relationship to the giants, to the anti-deities. To quote Raven Kundera, death is not evil, it's part of life, so is rot and decay and loss and the passing of all things. So is chaos, so is randomness, so is the destructive parts of nature that we humans find inconvenient. All these things are sacred. This may seem perhaps as the application of the belief in universal equality to the beings of the Norse cosmos, to try to play for both teams on the pitch simultaneously. At the same time, I think it's an interesting idea to see the gods as embodiments of natural aspiration on the one hand, and the giants as embodiments of natural limitation on the other. As far as I'm aware, there's no evidence of any classical worship of the giants in Greek or Roman tradition, or of the Norse giants, or indeed of Loki. In Hinduism, there are temples dedicated to certain of the Asuras or Rakshas, or the demons, who seem to correspond to the giants. For instance, there's one in Hanoi near Lucknow, Dukans, who is described as a Raksha in one of the Puranas. And he attempted to murder Lord Krishna. But the reason for the temple is not to praise him as he was in his life, but to remember him at the time of his death, when he was killed by Lord Krishna and thereby obtained moksha and was liberated from his sins. It's Krishna that they're remembering in him, not him, if that makes sense. Survivals in myth. Is it likely that the Norse myth preserve in the person of the giants an earlier, now extinct species who walked or loped the earth? Homo sapiens may have possessed the faculty of speech. Contrary to what Vladimir says, it seems the consensus is much earlier, maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, but perhaps that wasn't as elaborate as Vladimir was meaning. This would have been hundreds of thousands of years before the Neanderthals died out, perhaps 40,000 years ago, which may have been some 30,000 years before the ethno-linguistic entity, the Indo-Europeans, came into being, and from which our culture stems. As a species who would have been strong and might have been perceived as being more primitive, they might, in folk memory, have been represented as being bigger than they in fact were. Human history, as a recorded tradition of words that one may scrutinize, presents itself for perhaps no longer than some 6,000 years, I would suggest. And therefore, this makes any extrapolation to the case of the continuity of a memory through many millennia entirely speculative. The myth of the Great Flood, which appears widely across cultures, including the Norse, has been connected to the significant rise in sea level that occurred between the 15th and the 8th millennium before now, after the last interglacial maximum, when the ice sheets were at their greatest extension. So that would be the continuity of a folk memory for perhaps half the time since the Neanderthals left the stage. While it may be fanciful to see the giants as Neanderthals, it seems to be not unreasonable to think that there was some basis in reality for whatever caused the giants, the titans, the Rakshas, the Nephilim, and all such beings to become lodged in the collective consciousness. Thank you very much.